We have on the agenda for tonight a tshuva. It's actually a combination of two tshuvas, small tshuvas from Rav Yosef, and a major tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstien, from Igros Moshe. And we're getting down to the real nitty-gritties of whether or not one is required to risk his life to save another. Now, if you take a look at the tshuvas that we're about to learn, they all refer back to the Radbaz. So let's just review number 7 Aleph, which is on the bottom of page 3 in the name of the Radbaz, 7 Aleph. So that'll be like a segue for tonight's discussion. And he speaks about a situation in which they're going to kill a Jew if you don't allow yourself, submit yourself to have an organ of your body removed. It's a little bit gory. He says, "She'aniach adam l'sameis eino, o lachtoch es yodo araglo kidei shelo yamisu es chavero." And he says beyond a shadow of a doubt that this would not be a halachic requirement. There would be no obligation, but rather would come under midas chasidus, ashrei chelko, mi sheyochel lamod b'zeh. However, he qualifies that when can we praise a person who's willing to give up an aver of his body to save a Jewish life? That's only where there's no sakanas nefashos. It's what you call an aver she'ein haneshama tluya ba. And he could be guaranteed that he will survive this amputation, if you will, or surgical operation. But however, if there's a suffix sakanas nefashos, which means that one could seriously contemplate that he's putting his life into danger, then arezeh chosid shote. So we have here in the Radbaz 3 different categories. Let's go over them. One category.
Sorry. Who's Ravaji and where's the Radbaz? Like where did they mix?
Oh, the Radbaz.
Just
was Rabbi David ibn Zimra.
No, I understand that, but you discussing a tshuva of Ravaji who's quoting the Radbaz?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's not. Rabbi Moshe is also going to quote the same tshuva, the Radbaz. So I thought that as a segue to the tshuvas that we want to study tonight, give a little background, it would make sense that we take a look at the Radbaz. It's only 3 lines.
Oh, okay.
So again, if you have, on page 3, number 7 Aleph, it's kedai to see that inside. We've already seen it, but
to
move forward, I think we should see it again.
I think we skipped the line you said last time.
So we have 3 categories here. We have a category called an obligation, another category called midas chasidus, and on the other extreme, we have a category called chasid shota, which is totally negative. So you could have negative, you could have positive, and in the middle, you have what we call a ptur, meaning you're exempt, and there's no obligation. So if we go over the 3 categories, then what we have is the following. In a situation where they demand of you to give up an organ in order to save another life, that comes in the middle category of ptur, which means that you're not obligated to do so. If, on the other hand, you opt voluntarily to give up an organ to save another Jew, that becomes midas chasidus. But if, on the third hand, if you will, it's a situation where you will be entering into a pikuach nefesh, and your life will be perhaps on the line, and you might die as a result of this voluntary surgery, then you're a chassid shota. That's not acceptable. So this is the tshuva of the Radbaz. Again, we spoke about the Radbaz in great length last time, not just in this tshuva, but in a broader sense. You may recall that we spoke about a suffix sakana, which we kind of put at 15%. And there the Radbaz says you're obligated. And then we had another situation where it was 50%, and there you're not obligated. And then there was a situation of 60%. For sure you're not obligated. But again, all those cases that we discussed last week were not about giving up a limb of your body, to have a limb of your body amputated. That's this.
Sorry, just to go back, when you're not obligated, there's an issur also, right? There's not stam.
Again, there are two extremes. If you're not obligated, that's the middle category called patur. Now you have two possible extremes. Either you can voluntarily give up your life under certain you can voluntarily give up a limb under certain circumstances, or under other circumstances, you're not allowed to give up a limb. So you have in the middle here, you have a case where you're patur. You're not obligated. And then the question is, are you allowed to? And that depends upon the circumstances. There may be situations in which you're allowed to, and it's praiseworthy. Ashrei mi sheyachol lamod b'zeh. And there may be situations in which you're not allowed to, and you're classified as a chassid shota. We're going to see that Rav Moshe Feinstien takes it even one step further. You're worse than a chassid shota, even, as we'll soon see. So under what circumstances may you, and you would be given accolades and a tzalash because you voluntarily submitted yourself to this operation? That's when there's no element of sakana, which means that they can take off a limb of your body and you'll survive. And that's certain. When is it chassid shota? That's a situation where by giving up a limb of your body, you're putting your life into danger. That's not acceptable. Okay, now, again, without further ado, because we're always pressed for time, let's jump to two tshuvas of Rabbeinu Ovadia Yosef, Zichron Livracha, and that you'll see on page 4, number 7, Gimel, which is the first major paragraph in the middle of page 4. And he opens up this tshuva by quoting the Radbaz. And when the Radbaz says, in interpreting the Rambam, that if he could save a Jewish person from danger and he doesn't do so, then he violates an Isur Torah. What lav does he violate when he could have saved someone and he failed to do so? That's called lo saman al dam re'echa. And yet, says the Radbaz, that this lav of lo taman al dam re'echa does apply and generates an obligation to give up, to save a person who's going to die, even though there's ktsas suffix sakana. That's what we learned last week already. So please underline those words, ktsas suffix sakana, on the third line in the tshuva of Rav Ovadia. And we tried to suggest that ktsas suffix sakana would be something like 15%. I mean, again, we're not going into those details right now. That's a whole discussion unto itself. And he has the list of cases where someone is drowning. You could jump in, but there is an element of danger. Someone is being attacked by either a wild animal or a moritor, which is called listim. And certainly in those cases, there's an element of danger, but yet it's only ktsas suffix sakana. And in that case, the Radbaz would maintain that according to the Rambam, you have to try to save another life. And if you fail to do so, you violate the Isur Lav of lo tamen al dam re'echa. However, the Radbaz continues that if the issue of saving someone's life is merely a monetary issue, which is called mammon, then as far as mammon is concerned, you have to be willing to give up all your money in order to avoid violating lo tamed al dam reyecha to try to save a life. And if, on the other hand, the victim might lose his money, then, says the Radbaz, you don't put your life even into ktsas safek sakana for the sake of saving someone else's property. Could you imagine? Imagine a man has his life's possessions that are about to go down the tubes, worth millions. And you could simply save him that loss, but it would involve putting your life into a ktsas safek sakana. It's not permitted. It's out of the question. So we're beginning to see in the Radbaz various rules and regulations. We're getting, so to speak, a sketch of the Radbaz's opinion as to when you are either obligated or allowed to put your life into danger, and under what situations are you not allowed to put your life into danger. Okay, then? So again, in this sliver, this category called ktsas safek sakana, if it's for the sake of saving his mammon, absolutely prohibited. If it's for the sake of saving his life, it's absolutely required. If it's a serious safek, which means, let's say, 50-50, then the Radbaz says you're certainly not obligated to put your life into danger of a 50% nature to save someone else's life. And the Radbaz goes on to say that if it means giving up an organ of your body, even if there is no safek sakana whatsoever, it's an aver she'ein bo sakana, nevertheless you are exempt, and you would be a great midas chasidus, if you were to offer your limb to save someone else's life. If, on the other hand, by offering your limb, you would be putting your life into danger, that's called a chosid shota. So the real question that's left, and we want to see if we can answer that question based on the lashon, the language of the Radbaz, is the case of 50-50, which means that if you do nothing, then so-and-so will perish. No question about it. If, on the other hand, you put your life out there to save him and risk your life in a 50-50 situation, there is no doubt that you're not obligated to do so. Would you be allowed to do so?
So, sorry, just going back on the money thing quickly.
Yes.
Could you sue for the money if you spend money on saving someone?
Yes. Yes, that's a different discussion about
yeah, it's a different discussion. But
spending all your money to save someone's life, and you're obligated to do so, but you get reimbursed, and that was the rush that we discussed last week. But now Rav Yosef is going to address the question of that middle case, that questionable issue within the Radbaz, namely a 50-50 risk. And he says the following. This is the last part of the tshuva of Rav Avad Yosef Yechavadas, number 7 Gimel, that we started now, and now we want to finish it up. And he says the following. Im asofek shel sakana note el avadai sakana. Klomar al pirov yeshna sakana. Or afilu sofek shakel shel sakana eino chayiv limsor nafsha. V'rak im asofek shel sakana note el atzola, then he's obligated to put his life into danger. But let me add another sentence from Rav Avad Yosef, and we'll see it in number 8. He says, "Hamischased lahachnis atzmo b'sofek sakana, k'dei lahatzil chavero mivadai sakana reizeh chosid shota." A man wants to be super pious, and he wants to put his life into danger in order to save his friend from definite danger. That's called a chosid shota. So far, so good. Now take a look at number 8. Mechuyav lechnos l'safek nafsho lahatzil nefesh chavero. I'm going to prove to you that in a case of suffix, and we have to figure out what he means by suffix here, Rav Ovadia. Does he mean 50-50? Does he mean 90-10? What does he mean? He's obligated to put his life into danger. And he's going to prove it from the famous case of Rabbi Akiva ben Petura in Bava Metzia Daf Samach Beis, where they're going through a desert and one person has a keton shalmayim. He says that the Gemara talks about a case where if they split the water, they'll both die. Vada yamusa. And that implies that Rabbi Akiva will not split the water because they're both going to die. Says Rav Ovadia in a brilliant move, Masha Enkim b'safek, if the Gemara is limited explicitly, Gemara is outspoken that we're talking about a case where they'll both die. What about a suffix situation? Yesh lomar, yishtu shteim, v'lo yishtahu levado v'yomas chaveru bevada. V'im kein mechuyev lichnos atzmo b'safek nefashos hafilu b'safek atzola. 2 chidushim here in Rav Avad Yosef, based on the Gemara of Rabbi Akiva ben Petura, Shnayim shal mahalchi b'midbar. Chiddush number 1 is that apparently if it would be a suffix and both may survive by splitting the water, you're obligated to split the water. I have to give up half my water to you because if I don't do so, you'll definitely perish. And by giving up half my water to you, perhaps we'll both survive. So it's only a suffix. However, Chiddush number 2, by splitting the water, you're not even certain for sure that you'll save his life. It could be he'll perish even after you give him half the water. And nevertheless, you're obligated to put your life into a suffix because you want to save his life, which is also a suffix. So notice that Rav Ovadia is adding a big chunk of halacha to what we saw in the Radbaz. And he bases himself on that Gemara. The Radbaz never said that in a 50-50 situation, you have to put your life into danger. And moreover, the Radbaz never said that if you're going to put your life into danger, it could be that he won't survive either. You'll both perish. And yet you're obligated to do so and split the water. That was the Chiddush of Rav Avad Yosef. And you may recall many months ago, shortly after the tragedy of Shmini Atzeres, we discussed a tshuva of Rav Avad Yosef with regard to Uganda. And you may recall that at the end of the tshuva, he justifies sending Israeli soldiers to Uganda despite knowing full well that we're putting their lives into danger. And we don't know that their what word am I looking for? Project, no, enterprise, no, what word am I looking for? That their campaign, we'll call it, will be successful. What is it called?
Mission. The mission would succeed.
Mission, excellent. We don't know, there's no one guarantee the mission will succeed. And it's possible that it'll be a total loss, a total failure. Everybody's going to perish. And yet Rav Avad Yosef is willing to give his okay his rabbinic recommendation to go ahead with this mission, with this campaign, with all the dangers involved, in order to try to save Jewish hostages from definite death.
Isn't that a numbers game also? I mean, if it was like 3 hostages, would he agree that 10 Chaylim have to risk themselves from?
Right. No, you're
I
right.
mean, I'm just wondering.
The case of Uganda was 100, 100 hostages. I don't know
Right.
how many members there were in the Israeli mission. Maybe there were 20. I'm not sure the number. I don't know if we know the number even. But
No, I'm just saying.
If we take that tshuva of that, that's why I say that what Rav Ovadia is writing here in the Chavas Das tshuva, based on the Gemara of Rabbi Akiva ben Petura, is very reminiscent, and we can associate it with his tshuva with regard to Uganda. So what I'm saying is that there are scenarios in which you will put your life into danger, and apparently you're required to do so, even though it's a real suffix sakana. Again, if it's notel maves, if the chances are that you'll die as a result, let's say 51%, then he's already committed to the position of the Radbaz that in that case you don't put your life into danger. If, on the other hand, it's 15%, then you're certainly required to put your life into danger. But now, according to this tshuva, in Rav Ovadia's view, in his opinion, even if it's 50%, a real full-fledged safek pikuach nefesh of drinking only half the water instead of the full ketone shel mayim, you're nevertheless obligated to split the water. And Rabbi Akiva never questioned that. Rabbi Akiva questioned it because if you split the water, they'll both definitely die. That's the diuk of Rav Ovadia. I think it's, he doesn't need me to give him accolades, but I think it's a very strong diuk with tremendous repercussions to halacha, and it will support the position that we discussed last week in the Beis Yosef in the name of the Yerushalmi, that a person is required to expose himself to risk in order to save his fellow Jew from avadai misa. But Rav Ovadia is adding to boot that even though you don't even know that your campaign will be successful, and it could be the whole thing will be one lousy failure, pardon the expression, and everybody's going to perish. Nevertheless, you go for it. You put your life into a safek pikuach nefesh, suffix akana, in order to save someone from vadai misa, even though you don't know that you'll be successful. Okay, Ad Khan, we'll call it the Sephardic poskim, and now we'll move on to Rav Moshe Feinstien, the Igros Moshe.
Sorry, he's very mechudesh here, right? Because he's learning vadai on both cases. From one instance, he's learning vadai, that vadai you'll die, and vadai the other person won't. Saying one vadai is enough for 2. It's quite a leap.
I'm not sure what you mean by one vadai. Again, what he's saying is that if you do nothing, he will die. If you take the initiative, you might die, and not only that, even he might die at the end of the day. But since it's only a suffix, number one, suffix whether you'll survive, and number two, suffix whether he'll survive, you're obligated to jump in. That's an unbelievable chiddush.
No, but it's still a double thing.
I would not subscribe to his psak, but he does have a very strong point based on the Gemara B'Metzia.
But does he distinguish between like a suffix shakel and a small suffix? Because the Radbaz made that distinction.
Correct, and that's why I'm saying that Rav Ovadia went a major step beyond the Radbaz. The Radbaz only formulated and dictated an obligation in a case where it's a ksas suffix akana, but not a suffix ashakel. Let's go back again. I just want to get on. As you can see, I'm very itchy to get on to Rav, because I spent a lot of time on the Igros Moshe that I want to learn with you. But just let's take one more minute, and that's it. I'm only allowing one more minute to go back to the Radbaz, which is quoted here at great length in 7 Gimel by Rav Ovadia Yosef. And he says that hamischased lahachnis atzmo b'suffix hakana, which I think he means a suffix shakel. And again, there are other words in the Radbaz that'll prove that, which I don't have time right now to look for, but you'll have to trust me on that. Then he calls that chassid shota. He's absolutely opposed to it. That's the exact antithesis of Rav Avad Yosef's position in Chavadas. Let's go on. The Rav Moshe says, "Ubidavar im yesh chiyuv li'echad lachto chevaro b'shvil lahatzil nefesh chaver." Am I obligated to give up a limb of my body in order to save a Jew who's going to be killed? Says Rav Moshe, it's a machlokes harishonim, Rav Vosa, and we're going to rely on the Radbaz. The Radbaz says that you're not obligated to give up a limb of your body to save someone's life. Rav Moshe sort of apologizes because he doesn't have the tshuva of the Radbaz in front of him. So he's quoting it from a secondary source, which is called the Piskei Tshuva. And he says the logic is that lo samad al dam riyacha, which would obligate you to put your life out there to save someone else's life, comes under the lav of lo tamad al dam riyacha. V'hu kechol, please underline this, v'hu kechol halavin. We define and categorize lo tamad al dam riyacha like any other lav, like eating non-kosher food, for example. Shemechuyev lahotzi kol mamono kidei shelo v'rav alav. There are more paskins, you have to spend the last red cent that you own in order to save someone's life. And then you have David's issue about the Russian demanding repayment fine. And notice that there are more, when there are more builds up and embellishes this halacha, this chiyuv to save someone's life, he mentions that you have to spend all your money. Comes on the shach, and he says the following: why didn't the Ramah tell me a bigger chiddush? Rabbi say this is a case where you learn from the absence, the omission, rather than what's written. Why did the Ramah omit a greater chiddush? You always in Psak Halacha tell us the biggest chiddush, the most far-reaching halachic ruling. And if the Ramah wants to tell us how important it is and how far you have to go to save another life, he should have said that you have to give up a limb of your body. Kosav Ashach, however, Yesh Sakonas Ever Tzorech Ir. This is before he's medayik from the Ramah. Idami lenefesh, and you don't have to give up your nefesh to save another nefesh. Olamama, or do we treat a limb of the body as if it were worth X on the market? Umasik, and the Shach's final conclusion is nira lakula, that we have to be maker, which means you don't have to give up a limb of your body in order to save someone else's life. And the Shach derives this conclusion from, as we said before, the omission of the Ramah. Shumitam shalom not at a Ramah Rabusa. The Ramah should have told me a bigger chiddush. De'afilu ever tzarich lachtok shelo lav or lalav. How far does this lav of lo tamid al dam riyacha go? Even to give up a limb of your body, the Ramah doesn't write that. Alma, by implication, by omission, the lachtoch ever eina mechuyev b'shvil lav. You don't have to give up a limb of your body in order to avoid the lav of lo tamid al dam riyacha, but rather yavar, he'll violate the lav, and he will not save his friend's life. V'lo yachtoch evara, af shu ever she'ein bo sakon. This despite the fact that he will survive without that Ava. Ad kana kofa al. Okay, so I'm taking a pause because at this point, Rav Moshe is going to ask a bomb kasha on everything that we said. And keep in mind that there are two major premises underlying the ruling here of the Igros motion up to this point. Premise number one is that we treat lo saman al dam reyacha as we would treat any other lav in the Torah. And therefore, if we can prove from the Ramah that you don't have to give up a limb of your body in order to avoid a lav in the Torah, the same would apply even in the case of saving someone's life of the lav of lo saman al dam reyacha, because that lav is to be categorized and equated with every other lav in the Torah. And I can't overemphasize this because Rav Moshe in this long tshuva is going to vacillate back and forth on this premise. But right now, he is presenting the shita of the Shach as the Shach analyzed the Ramah and derived from the omission of the Ramah that one is not obligated to give up a limb of his body to save another Jew, despite the fact that the limb is an Eiver she'ein bo sakana. Because had the Ramah believed that you'd have to go that far to give up a limb of your body, then he wouldn't have stopped short with Mammon. He would have gone a step further and explicitly told us that we are obligated to give up a limb of our body. And again, keep in mind, Rabbosai, there's no element of sakana here. We saw in the tshuva Rav Avad Yosef, based on his analysis of the Gemara in Bava Metzia, that a person has to put his life into suffix sakana in order to save his friend and not violate lo tamin al dam riyach. And now we're talking about an aver, which doesn't even reach the level of sakana. It's an aver she'ein bo sakana. Are you beginning to see how the picture's unfolding in front of our eyes? We have Rav Avad Yosef on one side of the equation, that you have to put your life into suffix sakana to save someone else's life. And on the other end, we have Rav Moshe saying you don't have to give up an aver of your body, even if it means that it's an aver she'ein bo sakana.
The Rambam said that. The Rambam said that. He said it's only midas chasidus.
No, not if it's a small suffix.
Well, again,
Also,
By
you
giving
have
up a
to.
limb. Giving up a limb, the Rambam says it's a midas chasidus, but you don't have to.
correct. And Rav Moshe is now taking that position of the Rabbaz against. Again, I don't think Rav Moshe was aware of the tshuva of Rav Vadia. It could be the Rav Vadia's tshuva was could have been decades later. I don't know. But yet he's going back to this position. Now,
Just a quick thing of a Rashi. I know this time is of the essence, but doesn't Rashi say v'chol moedecha? Some people have money is more important than. I mean, he making the kavachomim between money and limbs. It seems from Rashi that some people would put their money higher than even
their life, yeah,
their life. So kavachomim their limb.
Yeah, but we're going the opposite direction. We're going the direction. Forget about those people that the Torah had to go out of their way, out of its way. But in MS, in the Torah's hashkafa, then we're saying is that a person's limb is even more valuable than all the money in the world. So that if I have to give up all the money in the world in order to save another life, I don't have to give up one single limb in order to save someone else's life. But I just want to point out one thing before we go on, because again, I'm gonna forget this. In the description of the scenario, if you take a look carefully at the language of Rav Moshe, he says, Eiver tzarech lachto. That you'll find that on line 5. And he repeats himself at the end of that sentence, and he says, Alva de lachtoch eiver eno mechuyev. Now, my question to you, and maybe you'll poo-poo my question and you'll assume it has no meaning, but is there perhaps a difference between severing a limb of the body and forfeiting a limb of the body? Meaning, severing a limb of the body is a very, what shall I say, a very profound kind of scenario. But maybe there might be situations in which you don't have to actually have a part of your body, a limb of your body amputated, but you can sort of forfeit a limb of your body.
What about kicking a wild dog, knowing that he might bat it off? I don't know if he's.
So again, I would say that in that case, the dog is like a surgeon who's going to amputate a limb of your body. But I'm just saying, if we come up with a scenario in which you can forfeit a limb of your body to save someone, but without having to go through the gory surgery of amputating a limb, maybe the halacha would change. Let me just throw it out there and see if I could weave it into the Tshuva Rav Moshe.
Could you give an example? But I don't know what you mean by forfeit a limb.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Give me a little bit of time to see what that means, to forfeit a limb without having it amputated. Okay. We're up to the word vi'af, if you can find that in the text. Because at this point, Rav Moshe raises a fundamental objection to everything that he's been presenting. This is the intellectual honesty of the dialectic of halacha. He says the following: what would be the deal if you would violate the Torah to save a limb of your body? We just finished saying that the limb of your body is more important than the lav of lo tamen al dam riecha. If that be the case, says Rav Moshe, the logical conclusion should be that I can violate the Torah for the sake of saving a limb. And what kind of a limb are we talking about? As we saw before, she'ein bo sakana. So now we're talking, Yechiel, about a case of sacrificing a limb without having to amputate it. But what we want to do is we want to implement a medical procedure to save a limb when that medical procedure would entail violating a lav in the Torah. And the logical conclusion of everything that we've said until now, when we put on the scale a limb versus a lav, the lav here is lo tamen al dam riecha, then we tip the scale in favor of the limb, if you follow what I mean. The limb becomes more important than the lav in the Torah. And if a limb is more important than the lav of the Torah, it should outweigh a violation of the lav when I need a refuah to save a limb, and that refuah requires a violation of a lav. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say the physicians would tell me that if I eat this potion, which is made up of nevelos and trephis, I can save a limb of my body. And there's no other option. According to the logic that Rav Moshe has presented, that we trump lo tamen al dam riecha, even though a life is at stake, for the sake of saving your limb, which is a limb she'ein bo sakana, then you should be allowed to violate the Torah and eat nevelos and trephos in order to save a limb. And yet, and this is where Moshe asks this, what I call intellectual honesty, this bomb kash on everything that we've been saying. The halacha in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim is that in a case of sakonis aver, asur lechalas hashabbos, vehu adin sha'asur lisrape b'shari suri lav b'shvil sakonis aver. Please underline those words. What is Reb Moshe seeing in the halacha in Orach Chaim, Siman Shin Chav Ches? A halacha that for sakonis aver we don't violate the Shabbos. Okay, so you'll tell me because Shabbos is an Isur Skila, and it's not indicative. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not an example of a regular law for which you get malchus. No, that's not true. Hu adin, again, I asked you to underline it, but I read it again. Sha'aso lisrape b'shari suri lavim, like nevelis and trefus, b'shvil sakonis aver. And Rav Moshe's medayik in the Shach, that the Shach, in one of his siyunim, how do you say that in English? References, I guess. In one of the Shach's references, he references this halacha when the Shach vacillated as to whether or not you have to give up a limb in order to save someone else's life, and raising the possibility that in order to avoid violating lo tamad al dam riacha, you have to give up a limb, which again, that's not the maskana, the final conclusion of the Shach, but the Shach, if you recall, vacillated about that. And invoking this simon in Orach Chaim, in Hilchos Shabbos, what the Shach was trying to tell you is that a lav in the Torah, no matter what lav it is, will trump the loss of an aver. Does anybody follow what's going on over here? Because this Yechiel is what I was trying to lead up to, about the difference between cutting off a limb of your body as opposed to forfeiting a limb of your body. Perhaps the Shach, in his final conclusion, is going to make the following distinction. Ein achinami, to save a limb of the body, you're not allowed to do so if it entails violating a lav, any lav in the Torah. But to actively have a limb of your body amputated, you follow, it's a little bit similar to, but not equal to, the distinction between kuvasei and shevi altas.
Yeah.
Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah, shevi altas, that's what I was going to say.
Excellent. We very often differentiate between doing something actively and as opposed to passively. Your situation now in Orach Chaim Simon Shin Chav Ches is a situation where you have an aver that needs to be saved. And in the current situation, if you do nothing, that aver will die. You will lose a limb of your body unless you implement a medical procedure, the likes of which will violate a law. And the Torah says, shevi altas. But that doesn't necessarily mean or prove that you have to offer a limb on the sacrificial altar in order to save someone else's life and avoid a violation of Lotan B'Yachid Shokah. I'm sorry, of Lotam al Dam Riach. Let's read it inside. He says, Umikol kol lo chashash lezeh hashach, umasik denira lekula. So the Shach is aware of the fact that you cannot violate a lav of the Torah, whatever lav it is, in order to save a limb. And yet, The Shach still maintains his final psak, his view, his position, that you don't have to give up your life in order to avoid the violation of Lo Tamid al Dam Riach. V'nira Pashut. What I think is going on here in the words V'nira Pashut is Rav Moshe Feinstien is going to make an attempt to be machalik, to distinguish between the two cases, which in Rav Moshe's original formulation are irreconcilable. Shahasam hacholi kfar yesh beha even. In Hilchas Shabbos, which sets the tone for all lavim, we're talking about a scenario where his limb is already in danger as it is now, status quo. And therefore, ein lo lasos iser, I'm going to add my own language here, bekuvase, to violate an iser lav, or in the classic case, l'chal Shabbos, but again, it doesn't only apply to Shabbos, kidei l'rapos as a aver. He's not allowed to violate a lav to save an aver that's already in danger. Aval kshu lehepo, his aver is fine, perfectly functional. Vu honest lav al lav, they're forcing him to violate a lav of Lo Tamid al Dam Riach and allow a Jew to be killed. Ach b'chatichas ha'ever yinotzel. He can actively, again, he's not doing it obviously, but actively have a limb amputated in order to save a life and avoid the violation of Lo Tamid al Dam Riach. Eino mechuyev lachtoch ever b'shvil shelo yavra Allah. Rav Moshe is absolutely serious and committed to this distinction, which is, I always say to myself how much lumdus, I always think of the Chazon Ish about, deflecting the hand grenade, how lumdus, two definitions, and differentiating between the two could have repercussions in life and death.
According to this, if a wild dog is about to attack a man, you're allowed to shoot the dog because the man isn't sick.
I'm not sure if I follow. You can shoot.
If a wild dog is about to attack someone and he's going to cut off his hand, you'd be able to shoot the dog on Shabbos.
Oh, you're saying that there's a malach of Shabbos of killing a dog? Okay, I mean, again, I'm not going into that because
the dog isn't lethal. We know the dog isn't lethal.
If he needs the dam to feed another dog. Okay, anyway, yeah. So let's say he's Machal Shabbos.
The dog isn't lethal. We know the dog isn't lethal. It's a small dog, but it can do quite a bit of damage to the limbs. You could probably kill the dog because the person isn't sick. He's saying the distinction is you just let the situation carry on as it is. But if it's an outside force, then maybe on Shabbos you'd be able to prevent that. I'm saying, let's say there's electricity.
Well, leave out
the loose electricity wire somewhere.
The guy is saying to you, I'm going to cut your aver off, sever a limb and amputate it unless you violate the Shabbos.
Yeah.
So you'd violate the Shabbos in order to save your limb,
rather than
have it amputated.
Yes. That's what it seems like, is distinction. You only can't prevent.
It's a very strange position, but the Rav Moshe is really committed to maintain this distinction. Well, let's think about it one more time. Again, I hope I'm not, I worked very hard on this, Rav Moshe. We haven't even touched the surface of this tshuva. Rav Moshe is saying that it's one thing to go ahead actively and violate the Torah law and a lav in the Torah in order to save a limb that's already in danger. That you're not allowed to do. But you don't have to give up your limb in order to avoid violating a lav. The only question I have about Shabbos is that, I'd rather leave that question unanswered. What would Rav Moshe say in that scenario about Shabbos? Because Shabbos is Nisur Skila. But if, let's say, the guy says to you, eat this nevela or I'll chop off your arm, chas v'shalom, right?
Right.
Then I think Rav Moshe would definitely say that you would eat the nevela, even though there's no life-threatening situation. Why? Because that's a case where he's taking off a limb that's not in danger. And basically what you're doing is just
So if your hand is very weak and it's about to fall off,
just
and unless you have the meat,
I just
then
want
you
to
can't
make
do that.
sure of one thing here. Just 1 second. The Nira Pashut, I want to read it again. The Chasam Shehacholi Kfar Yesh Beha Ever. English says fine. Aval Kishahula Hepa Shu Onus Lavar Alav Ach Bechatichas Ever Yinotze Mi Lavar Al Halav. Just 1 second. So what happens here? He will lose, right? He will lose an aver in order to avoid violating a lav. He doesn't have to forfeit an aver in order to avoid violating a lav. So that means that in a certain sense, an aver is worth more than a lav. But on the other hand, and that's why you don't have to give up an aver in order to save someone else's life. And on the other hand, to violate a lav in order to save an aver, see that I'm trying to figure out the rules of the game according to Moshe in terms of which is more important, a lav or an aver of a person's body. So we're saying now that to save an aver by violating a lav, that's what confuses me. Again, unless we go back to Shevi Altas and all that stuff, which I don't know if that's going to be. It confuses me because if an aver of the body is worth more than a lav, then to save an aver of the body should be mutter, even if it means violating a law.
So as a healthy aver is worth more, an unhealthy one is not.
Just doesn't sit well with me. Is that what Ramesh is saying? It's like a treifa. The aver has the status of a treifa because, well, it's not a treifa because you could save it. If you could save it, it's not a treifa, but it's a quasi treifa.
I mean, it's a strange wording anyway. It's not.
So again, for Hatzolas Aver, you're not allowed to violate a lav, but you don't have to have your aver amputated in order to spare yourself from violating a law. I don't know, Rabos. I was happier when I prepared this than I am now. I have to tell you the truth. Let me see it. Because he fears Oisi. He says, "V'sover aradbaz me'achash lo matzinu she'alav de lo taman al dam reyachad yech chomer mikol lav shebatorish ay mechuyev gam lachtoch eivar lahatzil chavero she'ena mechuyev below raya lachmiro mishar lavim ein lanu lo marchidush kazeh v'lachein ena mechuyev lachtoch." So he's saying that you don't have to have a limb amputated in order to avoid violating a law. And the Radbaz, therefore, would maintain that you don't have to give up your life. You don't have to give up an aver in order to avoid violating lo saman al dam riyach. And it's all based on the premise, if you remember that we discussed earlier, that lo saman al dam riyach is to be classified and defined as a lav like any other lav in the Torah. Which, as I said, Rav Moshe in the Tshuva is going to vacillate back and forth on this point. Oh, we don't have too much time left, but I just want to see that he quotes the Or Sameach here on the bottom of page 4, and he totally rejects the Or Sameach. To me, it was a chiddush that Rav Moshe Feinstien Bechlal was aware of the Or Sameach. I mean, I know I'm not aware of the person, I don't mean the person, but that he studied the Or Sameach on the Rambam. The Or Sameach died in the year 1930, I believe. or thereabouts. And Rav Moshe was a young man at that time, very young man. In any event, he says that mistakenly, the Or Sameach understood that the final conclusion of the Radbaz is that you have to have your arm amputated in order to save your friend. Ulai Kavanaso, he tries to justify the mistake of the Or Sameach, la nidon b'zeh, meaning that the Radbaz vacillated about this point. But certainly, Lamaskana, the final conclusion of Radbaz is you don't have to give up your limb unless you're a great chassid. Aval hu masik di eino mechuyev. V'rayoso misanhedrin daf mem dal. Oh, so let's end the shir with this sugya in Sanhedrin daf mem dal. This is fascinating. Are you guys aware of a principle called Kevan Shehigit Shuvei Nechozer Mag, which means that if, let's say, two witnesses testified, and based on their testimony, they condemned a person to death, and then the Eidim all of a sudden start jumping from the rafters, doing tshuva, and they said, we lied. What's the deal? What's the din in this case? We put the person to death. Okay. Now I'll ask you another question. Are you aware of the fact that in Jewish law, a person who was condemned to death by virtue of the testimony of two witnesses has to be put to death by those two witnesses? And the Torah says yad Eidem Rishona, and he has to have a yad. If his arm is cut off, even if it was cut off after the Gemar din, then the nidon is off the hook. Are you aware of that? So those are the facts on the ground. And the Gemara wants to know, to the two Eidim, after they testified, and as a result of the testimony, they condemned the accused to death, and now the Eidim are begging to save his life because they're doing tshuva, do we require the Eidim to cut off a limb of their body in order to spare an innocent condemned person from death? Because otherwise, as we'll see in the Tshuva of Moshe, those Eidim are guilty of Ritzicha. They are outright murderers. In a case of Azama, we would put them to death under the law of Kasher Zama. But again, they can't change their Eidus one iota because the Torah says, which is a very fascinating Xeris Akosuv. I mean, what do you do in a case of Eidim who want to change their Eidus and they're doing tshuva? And the Gemara's final conclusion, and that you'll see here on page 5, is that the Eidim do not have to subject themselves to this surgical operation. The second line on page 5, Eino mechuyev, again, you want to underline this, Eino mechuyavim liktoa yadon lahatzilo. Afal gavdi al yedei heidusam b'sheker nerag b'chinam. This would be a clear-cut proof that a person doesn't have to give up his life, an aver, a limb of his body, in order to save someone from Vadai Misa. And even in a case where he himself is the Rotzeach. And Rav Moshe rejects it. Ain't no right. And Rav Moshe comes up with a statement here that can make you shake. That Bezdin actually believes that the person that was condemned to death deserves to die. And therefore, Bezdin's arms are tied. They can't force the Eidim to sever a limb because they actually believe the original testimony of the Eidim, because the Torah says that's what they have to do. However, the Eidim themselves, perhaps on their own initiative, would be best advised and maybe even required to give up a limb of their body in order to save the person that they meant to kill. And Mirza Shembeli Neder, if you still want to continue, maybe you could recruit another couple of people, but we have this tshuva Rav Moshe Feinstien based on the Sunyan Sanhedrin that seems to be addressing this exact issue. Do you have to give up a limb of your body? And thank Davido for adding the word limb to the description of the shir. You just left out a few words which I left out because I thought you understood that in order to save another Jew. But you have to give up a limb of your body. And these Eidim are in that exact position to give up a limb of their body in order to save someone. Bezdin can't do it. They can't force him. But he himself might have to take that initiative.
Is that his maskana?
And that really depends upon this Radbaz.
Is that maskana? We'll do it next week.
Again, as I always say to you at the end of the shir, it's up to you. I'm eager.
No, I was asking, is that Rav Moshe's maskana, or are we going to be in suspense till next year?
Yeah.
Week?
Suspense is
to
good.
be in suspense because
Like watching
he's
watching
surely
dance.
not going to show up. Like this, it's a suffix, but we don't want to make it to a vada. Okay, then? And at some point, as I indicated a few weeks ago, we should talk about machne milcham. What are the laws that apply to a camp, an army camp?
Right. So all this discussion is lav dafka milchama situation.
No, we're not talking about milchama. We're talking about milchama only if you recall in the case of a chovesh, of a medic, right? The soldiers are getting injured. Like last week, my son is part of what's called Sheshesh Teisha, if you ever heard of it. It's what's called the Yechidat Chilutz. So in one day, he flew the helicopter. I mean, he doesn't fly the helicopter, but on the helicopter 8 times.
Wow.
They have when Nebuchadnezzar's soldier is injured, there's a place, it's a location in Gaza for Isuf. And that's where the medical team will collect the injured and fly him, try to give whatever they can on the helicopter. The helicopter is like a flying ambulance, And he was very happy. My son, Dr. Baruch, he very happy to report to me that Baruch Hashem, that all 8 chayalim are doing okay. I don't know what he means by that, doing okay, but certainly means they're surviving. So, what about putting your life into danger? The Machablim are still shooting and booby traps and RPGs and who knows what, and you're going out there to pick up, as a medic, to pick up an injured. To that extent, this may be relevant, although, as I said to you a few weeks ago, it might be that Dini Milchama change, but that's what's... Okay, then, thank you so much.
Sure.
And we should hear good news.